For generations, the people of northern China watched as their world turned from green to grey. What were once rolling grasslands became vast seas of dust. Rivers slowed to a trickle, the earth cracked like old leather, and the horizon was no longer a line of life, but a blur of yellow and brown. It was a slow, creeping sickness, spreading silently until it could no longer be ignored. Then came the storms. Colossal walls of dust, hundreds of meters high, swept across villages and cities, turning midday into a dim orange twilight. The government called them natural disasters, but for those who lived through them, they felt like a final warning. Something had gone terribly, fundamentally wrong. And then, just as quietly as it had vanished, life began to return. Satellite photos started showing mysterious patches of green in places that should have been barren. Villagers whispered about convoys of trucks moving through remote areas in the dead of night, carrying strange equipment deep into the dunes. Leaked drone footage revealed massive grid-like patterns of what looked like irrigation lines snaking across the desert floor. Rumors flew. Was it a top-secret military project? A new mining operation? No one knew for sure. But the truth was far stranger and infinitely more hopeful. This was the beginning of what the world would come to know as the secret project that made northern China green again. It was a quiet, audacious experiment led by a small group of Chinese environmental engineers, biologists and technologists. Their goal was almost laughably impossible: to bring the North back to life, not just by planting trees which had failed time and time again, but through a radical new synthesis of biology and technology, an approach so ambitious that even the experts were skeptical. They called it Project Qingmu, which means green revival. The core idea was deceptively simple: don't fight nature, help it restore itself, but at a speed that could outpace destruction. The old methods were failing. For every tree they planted, the harsh winds and relentless drought claimed 3 more. The Qingmu team realized they had to mimic nature's own processes and use technology to handle the parts nature couldn't manage on its own. Their first laboratory was a small experimental zone in the drylands of Inner Mongolia, right on the edge of the Great Hawkin Desert. Here they tested a revolutionary new kind of biological soil. It was made from a mixture of plant fibers, algae, and a special binding agent that could literally pull moisture from the air. When this mixture was sprayed over the bare sand, it formed a thin, stable crust. This crust trapped precious humidity and provided a nutrient-rich bed for seeds. Massive drones carrying tanks of this biosoil flew systematic patterns across hundreds of square kilometers, creating the world's first artificially stabilized desert ecosystem. The results were stunning. Within just a few months, patches of green began to appear, and this wasn't some artificial turf or a foreign species. These were native grasses, sprouting exactly where the wind once ruled supreme. Encouraged by this initial success, the team expanded their efforts. They deployed thousands of solar-powered sensors to monitor soil temperature and moisture levels in real time. Advanced AI algorithms analyzed this data, cross-referencing it with weather forecasts and satellite imagery to adjust irrigation schedules with pinpoint precision. This was restoration guided by data, adaptive, relentless, and incredibly efficient. Within 2 years, the first shrubs began to take root, and within 5 years, the most incredible thing happened. The dunes themselves stopped moving. To the outside world, this transformation seemed to happen overnight, a mystery unfolding in a remote corner of the globe. International news agencies only caught wind of it after their own satellites detected a massive, inexplicable greening in regions previously classified as wasteland. By the time the story finally broke, Project Qingmu had already restored thousands of square kilometers, all done quietly, methodically, and without any fanfare. But this secrecy was never about hiding something. It was about survival. For years, grand, headline-grabbing environmental projects had ended in failure, wasting budgets and eroding public trust. The Qingmu team made a conscious choice to work in the shadows, to let their results speak louder than any promise. Their philosophy was simple: prove it works first, then talk about it. And as the years went by, the results became impossible to ignore. The change was profound. Villages that were once on the verge of being buried by sand began to thrive again. Farmers returned to their ancestral fields, now protected by newly planted rows of windbreak trees. Wells that had been dry for decades started to refill as the groundwater levels slowly stabilized. The local climate itself began to change. Average temperatures dropped by nearly 2 degrees Celsius. Even the wind felt different, gentler, cooler, and carrying the scent of fresh grass instead of dry dust. What astonished scientists most was the explosive return of biodiversity. The moment the vegetation stabilized the soil, the insects came back. They were followed by birds, and soon after, small mammals. It was as if nature had just been waiting on the sidelines, ready to rush back in at the first opportunity. The restored lands quickly became home to foxes, eagles, and migrating cranes that hadn't been seen in the region for decades. At night, the dunes, once barren, now glowed faintly under the moonlight, covered with a living, breathing carpet of grass, a sight that no one alive had ever witnessed. The project grew not only in size, but in its purpose. It evolved into a living laboratory for green technology. Bioengineers developed new hybrid species of drought-resistant trees, with roots that could burrow 10 meters deep in search of water. Hydrologists designed ingenious underground reservoirs, lined with a special biodegradable film, to capture and store precious rainwater during the brief monsoon season. Every part of the operation was powered by renewable energy. Solar panels provided power during the day, and wind turbines took over at night. Even the drones that tirelessly planted seeds were recharged by the sun. Nothing was wasted, not even the data. Every single measurement, every bit of information collected by the sensors helped to refine and improve the next phase of the project. By 2020, Project Qingmu had expanded to cover over 10,000 square kilometers. China's northern deserts, once some of the fastest expanding in Asia, actually began to shrink. The United Nations sent delegations to study their methods, hailing it as a new global model for large-scale ecological restoration. Soon, other countries facing desertification, from Kazakhstan to Egypt, expressed interest in adopting the technology. The secret was finally out, but by then, it no longer needed secrecy. The world was desperate for proof that recovery was possible, and northern China had just provided it. But what made Project Qingmu truly extraordinary wasn't just the technology, it was the people. Thousands of workers, local farmers, and students volunteered to help plant and maintain these new ecosystems. Herders who once struggled to find grazing for their animals were retrained as eco-rangers, tasked with monitoring wildlife and preventing overgrazing. Schools began teaching environmental science not from a textbook, but by taking students out into the restored lands, turning the landscape into a giant open-air classroom. For the first time in generations, young people in the north didn't dream of leaving for the big cities. They dreamed of staying and building something that would last. This green revolution also triggered an unexpected economic revival. Ecotourism began to flourish as visitors came to witness the miracle for themselves. Companies specializing in desert agriculture, growing valuable medicinal herbs and salt-tolerant crops, found new opportunities. The vast clean energy installations created thousands of stable, well-paying jobs. Entire towns that had been on the brink of disappearing were reborn as symbols of hope and renewal. Perhaps the most profound change, however, was psychological. For generations, the people of northern China had lived with a deep-seated fear of the desert, the belief that nature was an unstoppable enemy, an overwhelming force too vast to fight. Project Qingmu flipped that narrative on its head. It turned fear into pride. The desert wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new one. When journalists finally tracked down the project's original team, they found a group of remarkably humble scientists. "We didn't set out to make history," one of the lead engineers said. "We just wanted to make life possible again." Another added, "The real miracle isn't our technology, it's cooperation. Nature does most of the work once you just give her the chance." By the mid-2020s, the green belt created by Project Qingmu stretched for hundreds of kilometers, linking up with other restoration zones in China's Great Green Wall Initiative. Together, they formed a living, breathing shield against desertification, a wall made not of concrete and steel, but of roots and leaves. From space, the transformation is breathtaking. Satellite imagery shows an unmistakable pattern, the endless tan of the desert being steadily replaced by the deep, rich emerald of vegetation. Some scientists have even started calling it the green heartbeat of the north. And when the rain falls, which it does more frequently now, it no longer vanishes into the sand. It soaks into the living soil, nourishing the new ecosystems that now flourish there. Visitors who stand on one of the restored plateaus today often describe a powerful feeling of disbelief. The air is cool and fresh. The horizon ripples with color. The wind carries the gentle sound of rustling grass instead of stinging dust. You can see children running barefoot on land that their grandparents once described as hopeless. As one elderly villager put it, "We thought the desert would swallow us, but instead, we swallowed the desert." The project continues to this day, constantly evolving. Researchers are now experimenting with microbial fertilizers, biodegradable sensors, and even genetically enhanced moss that can grow on bare rock and sand. The dream is no longer just about restoring northern China. It's about creating a universal blueprint for healing our planet's most damaged landscapes. It all started as a secret, a quiet, desperate gamble in a forgotten corner of the world. But now, the whole world can see it. This is a story of belief. Belief that we can fix what we have broken. Belief that science and nature can be powerful allies. And the belief that renewal can begin anywhere, even in the harshest, most desolate desert. The wind still blows across northern China, but today it carries the seeds of life. Thanks for watching.